Super. Thanks again, Declan. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for those of you who've just joined. Great to get the opportunity to talk to you again. So we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to get straight into it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to cover off, I'm going to spend about, hopefully about 35 minutes covering off the mock paper. It went a bit over on the international one, but that's what it is for. So I'll spend about 35 minutes covering off the mock paper, give you an idea if those questions were to come up in the exam, how we would expect you to answer them. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll put the mock paper away and I'll turn my attention to the real exam, okay, and give you some guidance as to what is likely to come up in the real exam as well. Okay, so that way, because there's an awful lot in law, so that'll allow you to narrow things down a little bit. Okay. All right. Now, in the interest of time, the 50 multiple choice questions, which you may or may not have had a chance to have a look at on the mock paper, we're going to send you out the answers on those. Okay. I'm not going to cover those off because by the time we get to the end of number 50, the time will be up. I'm going to move on to the 4 longer questions. Okay. But the shorter ones, I will send those through to you. If you have any questions on it, let me know. I'm around during the week, so if you have any questions on it, you can let me know. Okay. But that'll give you an opportunity to see how you did. All right. So if we get straight into the mock paper then for law, the first question is on contract law. Okay, so that's from module 1. All right. And the question is the following. So Paddy in Dublin wrote to Mary in Cork offering to sell his Mercedes car for €15,000. On receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him to say she would like to accept the offer. But because there was such a large amount of money involved and because there were 2 or more interested parties, Paddy said he wanted Mary to confirm her acceptance in writing. He said if she received her acceptance the next day, Friday, which was Friday, he would go ahead with the sale at €15,000. Mary immediately wrote out her acceptance letter and posted it to Paddy in Dublin using the standard post. Paddy received it the following morning, which was Friday at 11 a.m. However, on Thursday evening, Paddy had received a better offer from a local guy, and he had written to Mary to withdraw his offer. This letter missed the last collection and was not received by Mary on Friday morning. Okay, so the question that you're going to be asked here is, okay, well, is there a contract? Okay, and I'll tell you straight from the get-go, it's going to be a different set of facts, but that's also what you're going to be asked in the exam. Okay, there's going to be a question, okay, is there a contract? Okay, we'll go through the requirements of a contract in a minute, and then there'll also be something else in there as well to discuss. Okay, the something else in this example is the postal rule. Okay, they're using post as a means of communication. What are the rules in relation to, what does the law say in relation to the postal rule? Okay, that's the additional thing. It's not the postal rule, it's something else in the real exam. Okay. All right, so the first question we're asking, but the first question you're always going to be asking is, okay, well, is there a contract? Okay, you've been given a set of facts, is there a contract? So the 4 things that you need to have in order for there to be a contract is you need offer. Okay, has an offer been made? You need acceptance. Has the offer been accepted? The third thing you need is consideration. Okay, is something changing hands on both sides? Okay, otherwise it's simply a gift. And then the fourth thing is there an intention to create legal relations? Okay, do we think this is a genuine attempt to create a legally binding contract, or is it maybe something else, more of a gift or more of a kind of bit of a joke? Okay, all right, so what we'll do is we'll go through each of those requirements and we'll have a quick look at the facts. Okay, so is there an offer? Okay, so Paddy in Dublin wrote to Mary in Cork offering to sell his Mercedes car. Okay, Paddy put this in writing and sent it to Mary. Okay, is there an offer? I think there's probably a pretty good chance. Yes, there is an offer. Okay. Is there acceptance? Okay, so the next bit of facts is on receiving Paddy's offer, Mary telephoned him to say she would like to accept the offer. Okay, so she rang him and said, yes, I accept the offer. Okay, but because there were large sums of money involved, Paddy introduced an additional requirement. He said he wanted Mary to confirm her acceptance in writing. Okay, a court could rule, I mean, being perfectly honest, the court could rule either way. They might say, well, yes, the telephone call on its own was acceptance, or they might say, well, he had clearly indicated that he wanted acceptance in writing, so only when the acceptance in writing is taken care of, and I use the words taken care of deliberately, will there be deemed to be acceptance. Okay, so you can discuss whether or not you think there's acceptance or not. Okay, but the next set of facts does say Mary immediately wrote her acceptance letter and posted it to Paddy. Okay, so she completed the second step, which was accepting it in writing. Okay, we'll come on to the postal rule and so on in a minute. But the first couple of things are: is there an offer? Paddy has written to Mary to offer the car. Is there acceptance? Mary has replied in writing and called him. Is there acceptance? Yes, there probably is. Okay. The third thing is the consideration. Okay, the car is for sale for 15,000. Okay, you don't need to get into a discussion. Okay, is 15,000 a good or a bad price for a car? There is consideration. There is money changing hands. That's going to be fairly straightforward and quick. Okay, yes, there is money. There's talk of money changing hands, so there is consideration. Okay. And the final thing is there intention to create legal relations? There is a letter from Paddy to Mary. There is a letter from Mary to Paddy. And then there's also, when Paddy's looking to revoke the offer, he writes to her as well. So there's actually 3 letters involved. So the fact that there's 3 examples of proof in writing makes it a very strong case that there would be intention to create legal relations. Okay. So the very first thing you're looking to establish both here and also in the real exam is there a contract? Okay. And those are the 4 things you need to show. Okay. Now do go into detail. Okay. And do go into some discussion when you're answering the question. Okay. Don't just say offer, yes, acceptance, yes. Do say why you think there is an offer, why you think there's acceptance, why you think there's consideration. Consideration is going to be fairly short in this example because it's just this 15,000. Yes, there's consideration. Okay. So don't just say yes, there's consideration. You know, say what aspects of the facts you think means that there's consideration. But the answer to that's fairly short. But you can talk a little bit more, as I've just done, about the offer, about the acceptance, and the intention to create legal relations. Okay. You can say, okay, if it was this, or if it was that, or if he had done this, or if he hadn't done that, you can answer that way and say then there would be a different outcome. That's an ideal way of answering it. Okay. So I'm going to come on to the postal rule now in a minute, but just on the basic, is there a contract or not? Are there any questions on that? Okay, and do rely on case law. Okay, mention the Carlisle case. Okay, compare it with some of the facts, and there are some other cases in there as well. If you mention case law, and if you give a good answer as to why you think there is an offer acceptance or anything else, and you back it up with case law and you put a good argument together, you are heading for high marks. Okay, definitely. All right. If you do that consistently throughout your answer, you're definitely heading for high marks. All right. So if there's nothing else on the basic contract, then I'll look at the postal rule for a moment. So the postal rule, there's a fairly straightforward rule in terms of the postal rule, but that doesn't stop you kind of discussing it a little bit. But there's a fairly basic rule in relation to postal rule that if you accept something and you're doing it by post, it is when the letter hits the post box that is relevant. Okay. All right, so if we just look at where it is, okay, so Paddy said to Mary he wanted to confirm her acceptance in writing. He said if he received her acceptance the next day on Friday, he would go ahead with the sale at 15,000. Mary immediately wrote out her acceptance letter and posted it to Paddy in Dublin using standard post. Paddy received the letter and received it the following morning, which was Friday at 11 a.m. Okay. The key thing there is when did Mary post it? Okay. It's not when did Paddy receive it. Okay. The offer was accepted when Mary posted it. Okay. Now, so that's one letter. Okay. Heading from Mary to Paddy. That's one letter. There's another letter though that is sent on Thursday evening. Okay. Paddy received a better offer from a local person and he said he had written to Mary to withdraw the letter. Okay. This letter missed the last collection and was not received by Mary on Friday morning. Again, that part in terms of the law is actually not relevant. What is relevant is when did the letter hit the post box, okay? Or was it sent by registered post? When did it? So there's a lot of good discussion in that. You can say, okay, if this happened, then that's the case. However, if this happened instead, I mean, if Paddy's letter was posted first, then he's entitled to withdraw the offer. Okay, if Mary's letter was posted first, then she has accepted the offer. It's too late for Paddy to withdraw the offer. And you can get into scenarios and say, okay, well, you know, if there was, let's pretend there was a court case, did somebody witness Mary posting the letter? It mentioned it was done by Standard Post, but you can still use Standard Post just by handing something into the post office. Okay, was something handed into the post office using Standard Post? So you may even be given a receipt in those cases. Okay, so there's a lot of discussion you can get into in relation to the postal rule. The more of that you put in, the better. There is not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Okay, it's not a case of, oh, well, I went for Paddy instead of Mary and Paul disagrees. I don't necessarily mind who you back and who you decide, if you were the judge, would win. Okay, but what I am interested in is the argument that you can make for it. Okay, so that's question one. Any questions on that? Okie doke. So we'll move on to question two. So question two comes from module two, and that is on company law. Okay, and the question in module two is this: Murphy Limited has indicated in their company constitution that they will renovate houses and apartments and sell them at a market price. For 5 years, they continue this undertaking, but then, following a recent review of costs and recent sales across the country, they determine that there is significantly more money to be generated by purchasing land and developing it. Without undertaking any changes to the company constitution, they embark on this new venture, borrow a significant amount of money from Loan Bank, and purchase their first plot of land. Outline possible consequences for this action for Murphy Limited, describe how these limitations have been relaxed over time, and what steps Murphy Limited can take to avoid this problem. Okay, so there's 3 different questions that relate back to the shorter, it's less facts in there than there was in the contract one, the shorter set of facts that you have above. Okay, so on the consequences first, taking one at a time, the consequences. There are 3 potential consequences, okay, for doing this, okay? First one is the transaction may be void, okay? The court might take a look and say, well, you said you were going to be renovating houses, you made no mention of buying land and developing, so the transaction is void, okay? Now, if that's done fairly quickly, the damage may not be particularly significant, okay? Because it might just be a case of, well, okay, Murphy Limited need to get themselves back to the same place that they were before they started embarking on purchasing land. But there is mentioned the fact that they have borrowed money and then they go and embark on they buy their first plot of land. Okay, so the transaction the first consequence is transaction could be made void. How damaging that's going to be depends on how quickly it is done, okay? If it's done pretty quickly before they develop anything and the land is still just the land, that's one thing. If they've gone and they've built an entire block of apartments on the land, which potentially then needs to be demolished, that's going to incur quite a lot of costs, okay? Because the cost of the apartments is going to be lost, and the cost of putting it back the way it was is going to be significant. So first consequence is transaction might be viewed as null and void, okay? The second potential consequence is that Loan Bank could enforce a detrimental contract. So let's imagine that Murphy Limited embark on this venture and it turns out to be an absolute disaster, okay? In that case, Murphy Limited might be the one saying, well, actually, we were never entitled to do this, so Loan Bank have no grounds for claiming their loan back, okay? So the court may have a look at it and say, well, yeah, we agree, you're right. Loan Bank should have known that this was not the course of business that you normally engage in, and therefore you have no obligation to repay the loan. That's one potential outcome. That's the second potential outcome. The first one is that the courts enforce it. This is the first is that the courts don't enforce it, and this is one in this scenario they do. Okay, so the courts might take a look at it and say enforce a detrimental contract. So what is happening there is Murphy Limited might be trying to rely on the fact that they don't have any rights, that they have no entitlement to embark on the process that they've embarked on, and therefore Loan Bank are not entitled to claim their money back. The bank might have a look at it and say, no, we don't agree. Yes, you have lost a lot of money, but Loan Bank are entitled to their money back, so they may enforce a detrimental contract. That is the second consequence that could potentially happen. And the third one is that Loan Bank might be perfectly happy to go ahead with everything. Murphy Limited themselves as a company might be perfectly happy to go ahead, but somebody with a vested interest may take an injunction out and try to stop the transaction going ahead. So there might be people who invested in Murphy Limited who said, hang on, this is a disaster. This is not going to work. The company is going to lose money or is going to go bust, and they're going to take my money with it. They may take out an injunction and say, Murphy Limited cannot embark on this process, okay? And if that happens, a couple of things could happen. The transaction could be set aside. The transaction could, which may be mutually beneficial to both parties, could be blocked and could be set aside. Okay, so they may not be allowed to embark on it, even though both of them want to do it. Murphy Limited might decide to fight the injunction, which is going to come with some cost. Okay, and if they lose, they're going to have to pay it. And then the third thing is there is likelihood of negative publicity that could come from the injunction as well. Okay, might say it'll damage Murphy Limited's reputation. Okay. So those are the three things that could potentially happen in relation to that set of facts. The second part of the question asks, okay, well, what relaxations have potentially come on board? So 9 years ago, when the Companies Act 2014 was released, there were some relaxations. So you can, I mean, previously, you had to be very specific when you were mentioning what your company was going to do. Okay, you would say in your articles of association, this is what the company is going to do. It'll be renovating houses, it'll be renovating apartments. The Companies Act of 2014 has allowed you to be a bit more flexible in that. You can say things simply along the lines of the directors are entitled to embark on any process that they feel will be beneficial to the company and will ultimately make money. They can put that in. And if something a bit more general like that is down as one of the objectives of the company, then there is less scope for somebody to challenge it, even if they don't agree with the direction that the company is going in. So that's the relaxation that came in. Okay, it used to be very narrow. It used to be, well, if you do something different, it's going to have to be set aside. You can't do it. But now, if you actually put in something a bit general that says, okay, we're going to try and make money for the company, something similar to that, it's going to be very, very hard for someone to say, well, hang on, you're now operating outside of your company objectives. The final part of the question is, okay, well, what possible defenses could happen? How could you solve the problem? So the first one is the companies could be empowered to change direction. The example that I just gave, if that is in the company constitution, then that is a perfectly acceptable, buying land and developing it is a perfectly acceptable way to behave. The second way you could resolve the issue is if you're Murphy Limited, you could prove that Loan Bank knew it was ultra vires. Okay. So if you said, okay, well, we had our discussions at Loan Bank, here are the minutes of the meetings. We told them, okay, listen, our company constitution says that we will be renovating houses and apartments and makes no mention of buying land and so on. They knew this, they lent us the money anyway, and we went ahead and did it. If you can prove that, then the courts might well say, well, Loan Bank cannot rely on that as a defense for and I suppose the reverse, that Murphy Limited can rely on it to get the loan set aside. The final thing is to show that the activity is not legal in the first place. So if, for argument's sake, for some reason the developing of the land was going to be illegal anyway, I don't know, maybe from a planning permission point of view or something like that, if that was going to be illegal, then again it could be set aside. Okay. So those are potential arguments that maybe Murphy Limited could make to get out of the scenario if it all went wrong. There's an awful lot of ifs and buts. So the the more discussion you can put into an answer like that, the better. So quite a bit in that one as well. Any questions on that while I take a gulp of water? No, we're all good. Everyone still hear me and all good? Yeah.
Yes, thank
you. Terrific. Okay, thanks for coming on off mute. Thanks for that. Okay. So question three is from module 3, and the main topic in module 3 is EU law. It's not the only one, but it's the main topic in module 3. So shorter question here. The Commission, EU law, the Commission, European Commission, wants to cut greenhouse gas emissions across the EU. They settle on the figure of a 33% reduction over a 10-year period. Describe how this proposal would progress through the EU institutions to become binding on member states. Okay. So there are 3 stages that are up for discussion here. Okay, the first one is the consultative stage. Okay, so the Commission is the first player in the process. They initiate European Union policy. They drive the kind of strategic direction that they want the European Union to go in. Okay, so they're the first player when it comes to introducing European Union policy. Okay, what they will do is they will take the interests of member states into account. So they're saying, right, we're going to cut the greenhouse gases. That's with the aim of slowing down climate change. But they will have a bit of a look and say, okay, well, what is the impact going to be across all of the countries in the European Union if we do this? Okay, so for argument's sake, I mean, let's take some of this is you'll have to kind of bear with me on the arguments, but let's say for argument's sake that farming is the biggest contributor. I'm not saying it is, but if it is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases, and certain countries rely on farming more than others, maybe in some countries it might be 30% of their GDP, in other countries it might be 3% of their GDP. The countries that where 30% of their GDP comes from farming, they're going to be potentially more negatively impacted than the country where only 3% of the GDP comes from farming. Okay, so they will look into that and they will say, okay, well, how is it that we can maybe compensate on this? Can we allow them a bit longer to implement it? Can we reduce the reduction requirement? Probably not would be the answer to both, but it might be more likely that they would come up with some sort of means of compensating those that have been that have been inconvenienced by the proposal. That's probably more likely, but that is the type of thing that they will go through in the consultative stage. So the type of groups that they'll probably have a look at, if we're talking about climate change, farming would be one. Large industrial enterprises who might be involved in quite a lot of emissions, that would be another. Transport would be another. So they might say, okay, well, let's say we need to reduce the number of cars in Ireland by half in that time frame. We're going to have to do it by putting more buses or more trains or something else in place to compensate. So they will talk to people who are involved in the transport industry to discuss what the impact might be. Say, okay, say we implement this, what is the impact going to be? And they will share their views, and all of those views will be taken into account. Again, that is the consultative stage of the process. Okay. The next stage is the review stage of the process. So once the proposal from the Commission is finalised and sent to the European Parliament and the Council to review the proposal, the European Parliament and the Council will review the proposal, and they'll propose amendments to the way they're planning on going out. It's similar to, you would have also covered this in Module 1 of your law. It's similar to the Dáil Committee stage, where they review the proposal of the relevant minister. Okay, and the relevant minister says, I'm going to do this, and then a committee reviews it and makes recommendations. It's a similar process. Okay, so if the Council and the Parliament can agree, then off they go. If they can't, then a second reading takes place, and during the second reading, both groups suggest further amendments with the Parliament. So they work with the Parliament to try to come up with proposed legislation that's going to work for the Parliament, the Council of Ministers, and the Commission. If they adopt it, then great. If they still can't do it, then there's a conciliation committee which is established, which has an equal number of representatives from the Council of Ministers and the Parliament. That is formed, and they work together to try to get a solution. Okay, so a lot of work going on in the background to try to get the proposals done. If both the Council of Ministers and the Parliament still don't agree, they can block it at the final reading. Okay. And then, assuming they get past all that, there is what is known as the adoption stage. Okay, so we've had the consultative stage, we've had the review stage, and now we have the adoption stage. So if they get past it, the Parliamentary Committee votes on the proposal, possibly amendments. When the text is revised, it is put to the Parliament, and the Parliament vote on it. And if it is passed, then it'll be adopted. Okay, the process can be adopted, can be repeated a couple of times, depending on the type of procedure and whether or not it is in agreement with the Council. Okay. So those are the three stages that it would go through in European law to get such a proposal adopted: a consultative, review, and then the adoptive stage. Okay. So thankfully, we've gained a little bit of time on that question. Any questions on that? Okay, it's good we've gained a bit of time, because there are actually 4 questions to cover off on the tort question, which is the last one. So tort, as you probably are aware at this stage, is module 4. Okay, so the last of our modules. Okay, and we're going to go through the facts, and there's 4 questions here. So there's, just while I have it in my mind, there may be 4 questions here, but there's only 2 on the main exam. Okay, so there are 4 things to cover off. A little bit of crossover, actually, so you can save a little bit of time by answering one and then kind of using the same points to answer another bit. But there are 4 pieces to it, and there's bits within the pieces as well. So there's quite a lot in this one, but there is only 2 in the main exam. And again, it's going to be a similar case, which is you'll be given a certain set of facts. You'll be asked, okay, is there negligence in it? Is there negligence applicable in this or not? So that's what you'll be asked on, and then you'll also be asked. Well, I'll give you the second part now. You'll also be asked on the defenses. So okay, so what kind of defenses could you potentially come up with in the main exam? I might double check that to make sure I'm right on that, but that's from memory. That's what's in there. But before we get to the main exam, the mock exam, these are the facts for the tort question. Declan is a young teenager who's been bullied by another young boy, Rod, in his class in school. Rod has been taking Declan's lunch money and threatening to beat him up if he tells anyone. For months now, Rod has been making Declan's life a living hell. Walking home from school one day, Declan notices the local farmer, Tom Brown, has left the gates to a field open, and being naturally curious, he wanders in. The field contains a large barn, and it too is unlocked, so Declan wanders in there to have a nose around. He searches through some presses and finds a shotgun. The farmer has a license for the shotgun and is a member of the local gamekeeping community, a fact that is is a member of the local gamekeeping club, a fact that is well known in the community. The gun is empty, but after more thorough search of the barn, Declan finds some shells. He hides the gun and shells in a school bag and heads for home. The following day, Declan arrives to school, sees the Rod in the yard, takes out the shotgun, which is already loaded, turns it on Rod and shoots him, causing serious injury. Declan also suffers an injury himself from the kickback from the shotgun. Rod's parents want to bring a negligence action against Tom Brown because they believe that any person who owns a gun should be legally responsible for injuries caused by that gun. Okay, so 4 parts to the four questions. Okay, so the first one is, to bring a successful negligence action, what are Rod's parents required to prove? Okay, so this is a tort action. It's for negligence. So the first thing is there a duty of care? Okay, and in relation to a gun, so again, I mean, you can use bullet points to answer the question, but if you wish, or you can use a kind of flowing kind of essay format. But if you're using bullet points, I suppose do elaborate. Don't just say, yes, there is a duty of care and leave it at that, okay? Do explain why. So in the answer to, is there a duty of care? In my view, the answer would be yes. And it's relatively easy to prove that there's a duty of care when it comes to guns. Okay, there's the sole purpose of guns is to cause injury to something, to either someone or something that is alive. Okay, so establishing a duty of care for a gun is pretty easy. If the duty of care was in relation to something like a feather, it might be a little bit harder. Okay, because proving that you can do damage with a feather is probably going to be a bit harder. Okay, but very easy to prove you can do damage with a gun. So is there a duty of care on the gun? Yes, there probably is. Okay. What else do you need for negligence? You need to prove that there was a breach of the duty. Okay, so the key question there is, Tom Brown is the farmer. Did Tom Brown do or did not do something that a reasonable person would do? Okay, so you can talk about the gate. Okay, is it reasonable for the gate to be locked or not? Is it okay to have an unlocked gate in the country? Could be argued probably yes. Okay, because I'd say if you go around the country, most gates probably are unlocked. Is it okay to have the barn unlocked as well? Probably a little bit less okay to have the barn locked, okay, because there's probably something in the barn. Being a farmer, it's a good chance there's something in the barn that can cause damage to someone. If that barn contains a shotgun, it is definitely not okay for the barn to remain unlocked, and it's not okay for the shotgun to be available, and it is certainly not okay for the shotgun to be available and then somewhere else fairly nearby for there to be pellets available as well. Okay, so you can follow through that argument and that discussion, use cases that are in the notes to establish, okay, well, is there a duty of care or not? Okay, and the key test that you're looking to talk about here is the but-for test, where but for the fact that Tom had left the gate unlocked, but for the fact that the barn was unlocked, but for the fact that the gun was there, would Rod have suffered injuries? The answer almost certainly is not. Okay, he wouldn't have suffered injuries had it not been for the case that this was unlocked, that was unlocked, and this was available, and that was available. Okay, so breach of the duty of care. Lots to talk about on the breach of duty, so do talk about and share it, but that's the second thing you need to show. Third thing you need to show is there damage? Okay, all right. If Declan just fires the gun and it doesn't hit anybody, yeah, there is something in tort known as nervous shock, so you can maybe sue for that. But outside of that, there's no actual damage, so therefore there's no case. There is an injury to Rod, okay, as I said in the notes. There is also an injury to Declan, and even though Declan is potentially responsible for the injury, he is also a minor. Therefore, the duty of care that he would have to others would be significantly reduced. The duty of care for grown-ups to minors is pretty high. So the fact that Declan had injuries also means there's potential there for him to sue Tom Brown as well. Okay, that's the third thing required. Is there damage? Okay, and is there a causal link? Okay, so again, you're using things like the but-for test there. Okay, were it not for back to this, would that have happened? No, no, no. If the answer continues to be no, and did Tom Brown do what a reasonable man would do, or did he not do what a reasonable man wouldn't have done? If the answer to that continues to be a sequence of answers, then you have your causal link. So the four things you need: duty of care, okay, fairly easy to prove with a gun. Breach of duty, look at the facts and decide yourself, and use other cases. Is there a breach of duty? Is there damage? That's a fairly quick yes, no. There is damage to Rod and there's damage to Declan as well, okay? And is there a link between what Declan did? Is there a link between what Tom Brown did or did not do and the injuries that were incurred? One thing you could certainly say is, I mean, there's no real link between what Rod did. Rod was involved in bullying, but would Rod really have expected Declan to bring a loaded gun into school and to shoot him? Hopefully, you would think still in Ireland these days, probably not. So is there a likelihood that Rod could kind of say, that Declan could say, well, Rod should have expected that he'd be shot because he was bullying me? Probably not very likely. Okay, so very weak causal link there. Strong causal link between what Tom Brown failed to do and what actually happened. Okay. So that is, you can put all of that, I mean, you can spread it around. I'll go through the remaining three, but I mean, you can put, in theory, put all of that into the answer to part A of that question. So I'll pause there. Any questions there? Okay, so I'll repeat the good news. There's a similar set of facts in the real exam, but there's only two bits of the question, okay, which is negligence, and I'll double check, but I think it's defenses is the second bit. Okay, so speaking of defenses, the second bit is, okay, will Tom Brown have the defense of contributing negligence because Rod bullied Declan? I covered that again a minute ago. Not really. It's going to be fairly weak. Okay, there's a fairly weak link between what Rod did and what Declan ended up doing. The chance of foreseeability is pretty low. So will Tom Brown have that defense? He can try it, but the chances of him succeeding are probably pretty low. Okay. Part C, Rod's parents believe that Tom Brown was negligent because he left the gates open, because he left the shotgun in an unlocked barn, and because Declan was able to find the shells in the barn also. For each of these allegations, determine is there actual causation. So as I was saying, gate being open, no, not necessarily. Probably difficult to prove that bit, that there's negligence there just on the gate alone. Is there negligence because the barn was unlocked? I think that becomes a stronger one. Okay, the likelihood of there being, even if there's no gun there, the likelihood of there being farm machinery that can cause damage to a minor becomes increasingly likely. You can then go back and then say, because the gates are unlocked, so if the gate was locked, Declan wouldn't be able to get to the unlocked barn, or make it a lot harder for him to get to the unlocked barn. So you can put that argument. So all of this is stuff that's good stuff that you can put into your answer. And then, is there negligence because Declan was able to find the shells in the barn? Yes, there's fairly strict rules in relation to gun ownership in Ireland. They're supposed to be in a gun safe, which I think needs to be locked to the floor. The pellets are supposed to be separate, probably locked away separately, and so on. So, and that I'm less clear on what the rules are on the pellets, but pretty strong argument on the gun and the pellets. Good argument on the barn. Not so good an argument on the gates, but when you then bring the barn and what's in the barn into it, you could say, well, if only he'd locked the gates, it would make it harder for Declan to do it, okay? So the gates come into play because of what is in the barn, okay? And then finally, question D, can Declan maintain a cause of action for Tom against an injury? Yes, because he's a minor, okay? If he was over 18, probably not. Because once you hit 18, your responsibilities kick in, and you are more responsible for your actions than somebody else. But could he take a course of action? Even if Rod's parents decided they weren't going to take any sort of course of action, could Declan himself and his parents take a course of action against Tom? Yes, because Declan got hold of something that a minor should not have been able to get hold of. Tom arguably did not take reasonable precaution to stop him doing it, and because of that, Declan hurt himself with the kickback from the gun. It's a lot in there, but I'll pause now. Any questions on that? We've caught up well, which I'm pleased about. Okay, So I will go to the main exam then and just tell you what is going to be on it. It's fairly quick, but question 1 is going to be on contract law. Okay. So similar to Paddy and Mary and the car, okay, the question you'll be asked is, okay, is there a contract? Okay. And there will be something else in there as well. It's not going to be the postal rule this time. It's going to be something else. Okay. Is there something else that might change, once you've gone through your offer? So, in terms of how you answer it, you start with, okay, is there offer? Is there acceptance? Is there consideration? Is there intentional for legal relations? Keep linking it back to the facts of the case. Keep arguing one side or the other, okay? And keep relying on previous case law that may be in the notes to back up your arguments, okay? Once you've done that, there's a second. It'll be clear enough when you read the question itself. There is something else to take into consideration. It's not the postal rule this time, but there's something else that could be argued that is in the notes. Do take that into consideration. Then ask yourself the question, do you feel that changes the contract, whether there's a contract or not, okay? So that is question 1. It's on contract law. So you don't need to cover off and learn off, okay, the Supreme Court and this is the role of a solicitor or a barrister or anything like that. It's on contract law, okay? And that's all you need to know from module 1 for the entire exam, okay? Apart from, I'll just caveat that, apart from the MCQs, okay? The multiple choice questions cover all of modules 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they go right from the beginning of the module right to the end of the module and back again, okay? And they may not necessarily always be in the order that they are in the modules either. So to get a good score, it is possible to get a good score on the multiple choice. And if you get a good score, there are people who get well into the 40s out of the 50 questions in the MCQs. Okay, so try to be one of those people. Okay, because if you score well on that, you've got an awful lot of marks already banked for your exam. But you will need to know all of module 1, all of module 2, all of module 3, and all of module 4. And Declan may have mentioned this at the beginning, but you won't have time to go and find them. Okay, you need to, you may be able to find a couple of them here and there, but don't be searching for all 50 of them because you will run out of time. You need to know the answer to, I'd say, a good 40 of them to be able to do well on it. Okay, because you will run out of time going looking for them. Okay, all right. But some of them will be, some of them will be very similar to the ones that are on the mock exam. And some of them might even be identical, but do just be careful, read the question correctly. Just make sure we haven't put the word not in or the opposite or something like that. So that it's actually a bit different to the real one. So, but on the MCQs, you need to know all 4 modules. In terms of the longer questions, for module 1, you need to know contract law. You don't need to worry about the earlier stuff. Okay. Brehon law or any of that. You don't need that. Okay. So question 2, in the mock paper, it was to do with ultra vires and so on, whether or not a company was entitled to do something. It's not that in the main exam. What it is dealing with in the real exam is it is dealing with something going wrong with a company. Okay, so a company has fallen on hard times financially. Okay, there are a number of courses of action that could happen if a company falls on hard times. Okay. And start talking about those courses of action. Okay, so that gives you fairly good narrowing down of where to focus in module 2. Okay, you can forget, apart from the MCQs again, you can forget about the other stuff. Okay, it's when things go financially bad, and that is covered in module 2. What are the options in terms of courses of action? Okay. For question 3 is from module 3, and module 3 is pretty much primarily on EU law. Okay, in the mock paper we talked about bringing in something to reduce greenhouse gases. Okay, so it was how will the Commission go about doing that? Again, it's not the same question. What we want to know in the real exam is basically what happens next. Okay, so let's assume that the Commission and the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers have gotten this proposal over the line, and we now have a scenario where the reduction in greenhouse gases is now signed into European law. What happens then? Okay, that'd be the best guidance I could give you in terms of question 3. What comes next? Okay, and what can be done if that does not happen? Okay, so that's the general guidance I give you in terms of question 3. And then question 4 is tort. Okay. It's not going to be Declan and Rod and the shotgun this time. It's going to be something else. So there is a different set of facts in there this time. Okay. And there's two questions, not four, there's two. First one will be, okay, well, is there negligence? Okay, so there may be a couple of parties in there in the example. Can they sue for negligence based on what has happened? Okay, that's the first part of the question. And then the second part, if I remember correctly, is on defenses. Let me just see. Sorry, just bear me 1 second. I was trying to just double check that point because it's bugging me as much as anybody else. Let's see. Just bear me one more moment. See if I can get it. Okay, one more moment. I do have it, I think. Yes, it is. It is on defenses. Yeah. So advise on any possible defenses. Okay. So the question, the fourth question is on tort. There is a question, is there negligence? And then the second part of the question is, okay, so if there is negligence, what defenses could the defendant maybe use to argue that to get themselves off, basically? Okay. And I'll narrow it down a bit more for you. We covered off negligent misstatements in the second assignment. It is not negligent misstatements. We're done with that. Okay. So you don't need to, again, you may need it for the MCQs, but you don't need it for the long questions. Okay. So I think other than that, that's it. I mean, so, you know, where there's cases, do refer back to the facts, okay, and try to argue one way or the other. There isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. Do try to argue, okay. Back up your arguments, okay. Don't just say yes offer, yes acceptance, full marks, please. You know, do tell me why you think these are the cases. So, so argue your case, back it up, bring case law into it. And don't be afraid to do a bit of discussion, you know, kind of if this was the case, if he hadn't done this, then this might be the case, but he did, so this is what I feel is the case. Don't be afraid to discuss, because that's what judges do all the time. And other than that, best of luck.
That's great, Paul. Well done. I'll just